The rain fell like iron needles over the camp, cold, unforgiving. The kind of rain that turns dirt into mud and mud into despair. In the spring of 1945, somewhere in the wreckage of what used to be Germany, a convoy of trucks rolled through the shattered gates of a prisoner of war camp, now under American control. Inside those trucks sat women, pregnant women, German women. Their faces were pale, hollow, carved by hunger and fear. They wore torn coats that no longer kept out the wind. Their eyes were empty, staring at nothing, expecting nothing. They had been soldiers' wives, farmers' daughters, nurses, teachers. Now they were prisoners, enemies. The victors called them Nazis. The defeated called them survivors. But in that moment, sitting in the back of those trucks with their swollen bellies and trembling hands, they were simply terrified. Among them was a woman named Greta Müller. She was 25 years old, 8 months pregnant, and certain she was going to die. Her husband had frozen to death in Stalingrad 3 winters ago. Her home had been flattened by bombs. And now, as the truck stopped and the canvas flaps were thrown open, she looked up at the American soldiers standing in the rain and thought, "This is where it ends." The camp smelled of rust and rotting wood. Barbed wire stretched in every direction. Guard towers loomed like vultures. The women were ordered out of the trucks. Some stumbled. Others had to be carried. Greta climbed down slowly, clutching her belly, feeling the baby kick inside her. She wondered if her child would ever see daylight. The soldiers watched them with hard eyes. These were men who had crossed oceans to fight a war. Men who had lost brothers, friends, limbs. Men who had seen things no human should see. And now they were being told to guard the wives and mothers of the men who had caused all that suffering. Hatred was easier than mercy. Greta could feel it in the air, thick as smoke. The camp was a ruin. The barracks had holes in the roofs. The floors were slick with rainwater. There were no beds, only wooden planks. No heat. No light after dark. The latrines were pits dug into the ground, barely covered. The women huddled together for warmth, their breath visible in the freezing air. Some wept quietly. Others stared at the walls in silence. Greta sat in a corner, her back against the cold wood, her hands resting on her belly. She had not eaten a real meal in weeks. Her body was weak, her mind was weary, but the baby inside her kept moving, kept fighting, and so she had to keep going. Outside, the American guards paced back and forth, rifles slung over their shoulders. They did not speak to the prisoners. They did not look at them unless they had to. To them, these women were part of the machine that had devoured Europe. They were complicit. They were guilty. And guilt, in the spring of 1945, demanded punishment. But there was one soldier who did not look away. His name was Lieutenant James Harris. He was 28 years old, from a small town in Ohio, and he had seen enough death to last 1,000 lifetimes. He stood near the gate, watching the women file into the barracks, and something in his chest tightened. He had been trained to hate the enemy. But these were not soldiers. These were mothers. And the war, whether anyone wanted to admit it or not, was over. The first night in the camp was endless. The wind howled through the broken walls. The rain never stopped. Greta lay on her side, trying to find a position that did not hurt. The baby pressed against her ribs. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her husband's face. But the memory was fading. All she could see now was mud and wire and the dark shapes of soldiers moving past the windows. Then, in the middle of the night, a sound shattered the silence. A scream, high and sharp and full of agony. The women scrambled to their feet. In the far corner of the barracks, a young woman named Anna was doubled over, clutching her stomach. Her water had broken. She was going into labor. Panic spread like fire. There was no doctor, no midwife, no supplies. The women gathered around her, trying to help, but none of them knew what to do. Anna screamed again, her body convulsing. Greta pushed through the crowd and knelt beside her. She had seen her own mother give birth to her younger brother years ago. She knew enough to be dangerous, but this was different. Anna was bleeding too much. The baby was coming too fast. Greta looked up at the others. "We need help," she said in German. "We need a doctor." One of the women ran to the door and began pounding on it, shouting in broken English, "Help, please, baby coming." The guards outside hesitated. They looked at each other, unsure. Then one of them turned and ran toward the command post. Minutes later, Lieutenant Harris arrived. He opened the door and stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Blood and sweat and fear. Then he saw Anna on the floor, writhing in pain, and his training kicked in. "Get the medic." He barked at the guard behind him. Now, Dr. William Coleman arrived 15 minutes later. He was a surgeon from Philadelphia, a man who had stitched up soldiers on battlefields and amputated limbs in makeshift tents. But this was different. This was a woman in labor, surrounded by prisoners, in a camp where regulations said prisoners were not a priority. He knelt beside Anna anyway. "Hold her shoulders," he said to Greta. She obeyed. Coleman worked quickly, his hands steady. The baby was breech. He had to turn it. Anna screamed. The women around them held their breath. Harris stood by the door, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. He had seen men die, but watching a woman fight to bring life into the world in a place like this was something else entirely. After what felt like hours, the baby came. A boy. Tiny. Blue. Not breathing. Coleman cleared the infant's mouth, rubbed his chest, breathed into his lungs. The seconds stretched into eternity. Then, a sound. A thin, fragile cry. The baby was alive. The women gasped. Some began to cry. Greta looked down at the newborn in Coleman's arms and felt something crack inside her. Hope. Dangerous. Terrifying hope. Coleman wrapped the baby in his own jacket and handed him to Anna. She held him against her chest, tears streaming down her face. Harris stood in the doorway, watching. He looked at Coleman. The doctor looked back. Neither of them said a word. But they both knew. Something had shifted. The rules had changed. By morning, the story had spread through the camp like wildfire. The Americans had saved a German baby. A medic had come in the night. A soldier had disobeyed orders. The women whispered to each other in hushed tones, afraid to believe it, afraid to hope. "They brought milk," one of them said. "Real milk. In bottles. And blankets." Another added, "Clean ones." Greta listened but said nothing. She had learned long ago not to trust kindness. Kindness was a luxury that war could not afford. But when she looked at Anna holding her baby, wrapped in an American Army blanket, sucking from a bottle of powdered milk mixed with clean water, she felt something she had not felt in years. Gratitude. Lieutenant Harris returned the next day. He carried a crate. Inside were more bottles, more blankets, and a small supply of medicine. He set it down inside the barracks without a word. The women stared at him. He stared back. Then he turned and left. Dr. Coleman came too. He checked on Anna and the baby, took notes, and left behind bandages and ointment. The women did not know what to make of it. One of them, an older woman named Helga, approached Greta. "Why are they doing this?" she asked. Greta shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe they pity us. Maybe. Or maybe," Helga said, quietly. "They are better men than we thought." Greta looked down at her belly. Her baby would be born soon. And for the first time, she dared to imagine that her child might survive. But not everyone in the camp believed in mercy. The guards who had lost brothers in France, who had seen friends blown apart in Belgium, who had marched through the death camps and seen the ovens, they did not forgive so easily. To them, these women were the wives and sisters of the men who had done those things. They deserved nothing. One guard, a sergeant named Daniels, confronted Harris one afternoon. "You're wasting supplies on them," Daniels said. "They're prisoners." Harris looked at him. "They're also pregnant." "So what? Their husbands killed our boys." "Their husbands are dead." "Good." Harris clenched his jaw. "The war is over, Daniels." "Not for me." The two men stood in silence. Then Daniels walked away. Harris watched him go and knew that the battle was not over. It had just moved inside the camp. Inside the barracks, Greta sat by the window, staring at the rain. She thought about her husband. She thought about the letters he had sent from the front, letters full of lies about victory and glory. She thought about the day the telegram came, the day she learned he was never coming home. She had been angry then. Angry at him for leaving. Angry at the war for taking him. Angry at herself for believing it would end differently. Now she was just tired. Tired of hate. Tired of fear. Tired of being a symbol of something she had never chosen to be. She placed her hand on her belly and felt the baby move. This child had done nothing wrong. This child deserved a chance. And maybe, just maybe, the world was not as cruel as she had believed. That night, Greta decided to write a letter. She had no one to send it to. Her mother was dead. Her friends were scattered or gone, but she needed to put the words somewhere to make sense of what was happening. She found a scrap of paper and a pencil borrowed from one of the other women. She wrote in German, slowly, carefully. "Dear Mama, I do not know if you can hear me. I do not know if there is anything after this. But I need to tell someone. The Americans are helping us. I do not understand why. We are their enemies. Our men killed theirs, but they bring milk for the babies. They bring medicine. A doctor saved Anna's child. I do not deserve this kindness, but my baby does. And I am grateful. I am so grateful I could weep. Maybe the world is not only darkness. Maybe there is still something good left. I hope you are somewhere safe. I hope you are proud of me. I will try to be strong. For the baby. For you. With love, Greta." She folded the letter and kept it in her pocket. The next day, Dr. Coleman was conducting a routine inspection of the barracks. He saw the letter sticking out of Greta's coat. "May I?" he asked in broken German. Greta hesitated, then handed it to him. He read it slowly, his eyes softened. When he finished, he folded it carefully and gave it back. "You are a good mother," he said. Greta did not understand all the words, but she understood the tone. She nodded. That evening, Coleman returned with more supplies. Powdered milk, antibiotics, bandages. He also brought something unexpected. A small wooden crib, handmade by one of the soldiers. He placed it beside Anna's bed. The women gathered around it, touching the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship. One of them whispered, "They made this for us." Coleman nodded. "For the babies," he said. Greta stood in the back, watching. She felt something break inside her. Not pain. Something else. The shell she had built around her heart was cracking, and light was starting to seep through. But mercy has a price. A week later, a colonel arrived at the camp. His name was Thornton. He was a man of regulations, a man who believed in order and discipline and the chain of command. He had heard rumors about the supplies being given to the prisoners. He had come to put a stop to it. He called Harris and Coleman into his office. "I understand you've been distributing medical supplies to the prisoners," Thornton said. "Yes, sir," Coleman replied. "Pregnant women. Newborns. They are prisoners of war. Not civilians. Not refugees. Prisoners. They are human beings," Harris said. Thornton's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, Lieutenant." "Sir, with respect, these women are not combatants. They are mothers. Their children are innocent. Their husbands were not." Coleman stepped forward. "Colonel, if we deny them basic medical care, we are no better than careful, doctor." Thornton interrupted. "I know what you're about to say, and I will not tolerate it." The room fell silent. Thornton stood and walked to the window. The regulations are clear. Prisoners receive standard rations. Medical care is to be provided only in cases of emergency. Milk, medicine, blankets, those are luxuries we do not have the authority to provide. Those babies will die without it, Coleman said. That is not our responsibility. Harris felt his blood boil. If we stop caring, what's the point of victory? Thornton turned to face him. The point, Lieutenant, is that we won. They lost. And there are consequences for losing. Even for children? Thornton did not answer. That is all. You are dismissed. Harris and Coleman left the office. Outside, they stood in the rain, silent. Finally, Coleman spoke. What are we going to do? Harris looked toward the barracks. We're going to keep helping them. He'll have us court-martialed. Then he'll have to catch us first. That night, under the cover of darkness, Harris and a small group of trusted soldiers carried crates of supplies to the barracks. They moved quietly, avoiding the main lights, sticking to the shadows. The women were waiting. Greta stood by the door. When she saw Harris, she opened it. He stepped inside and set down the crate. The women gathered around. Inside were bottles of milk, tins of formula, medicine, bandages, and blankets. One of the women began to cry. Another whispered a prayer in German. Greta looked at Harris. She did not know much English, but she knew one word. Thank you, she said. Harris nodded. For the babies, he replied. As he turned to leave, one of the women grabbed his hand. She pressed something into his palm, a small wooden cross, carved by hand. He looked down at it, then back at her. She said something in German. Greta translated. She says you are a good man. She says God will remember. Harris closed his hand around the cross. He did not know what to say, so he simply nodded and left. Outside, Coleman was waiting. We can't do this forever, Coleman said. I know, Harris replied. But we can do it tonight. And so they did. Night after night, they smuggled supplies into the camp. They risked their careers, their reputations, their freedom, but they could not stop, because every time they saw a baby drinking from a bottle, every time they saw a mother's face soften with relief, they knew it was worth it. Then came the crisis. One of the newborns, a little girl named Lena, stopped breathing. It was the middle of the night. The mother screamed for help. The women pounded on the door. Harris came running. He found Coleman already inside, holding the baby, performing chest compressions. The tiny body was limp, her lips blue. The mother was sobbing, praying, begging. Coleman worked in silence, his face tight with concentration. 30 seconds. A minute. 2 minutes. Nothing. Greta stood beside the mother, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort that even she did not believe. Then, a gasp. A tiny, fragile gasp. The baby's chest rose. Her eyes fluttered open. She began to cry. The sound was the most beautiful thing Greta had ever heard. The mother collapsed, weeping, clutching her daughter. The other women surrounded them, touching the baby, whispering prayers of thanks. Coleman sat back, exhaling, his hands shaking. Harris stood in the doorway, his throat tight. He looked at the women, at the baby, at the life that had just been saved, and he thought, this is what we fought for. Not land, not flags. This. The next morning, Colonel Thornton arrived unannounced. He had received reports of unauthorized activity. He walked through the camp, inspecting the barracks. When he saw the cribs, the blankets, the bottles, his face darkened. He summoned Harris. I gave you a direct order, Lieutenant. Yes, sir. You disobeyed it. Yes, sir. Why? Harris looked him in the eye. Because it was the right thing to do. Thornton stared at him for a long moment. Then he walked over to the window. Outside, one of the mothers was sitting in the pale sunlight, holding her baby, singing softly. Thornton watched her. He said nothing. Finally, He turned back to Harris. I should have you arrested. I understand, sir. Thornton sighed. But I won't. Harris blinked. Sir? I was at Dachau. Lieutenant, I saw what they did, and I swore I would never become like them. He looked at the mother and child again. If we punish innocents, we lose the war all over again. He walked to the door, then paused. Keep the supplies quiet, and keep them alive. Then he left. Harris stood there, stunned. Coleman appeared beside him. Did he just... Yeah, Harris said. He did. The weeks passed. The babies grew stronger. The mothers grew healthier. The camp, once a place of despair, became something else. Not a home, but a place where life was possible. Greta gave birth on a rainy afternoon in late May. Dr. Coleman delivered the baby. A girl. Healthy. Crying. Alive. Greta held her daughter and wept. She named her Clara, after her mother. Harris came to see her the next day. He brought a blanket and a bottle of milk. Congratulations, he said. Greta smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile. Thank you, she said in halting English. For everything. Harris shook his head. You did the hard part. He looked down at the baby. Clara was asleep. Her tiny fist curled against her mother's chest. She's beautiful, he said. Greta nodded. She is hope. Harris felt something in his chest tighten. He had seen so much darkness, but in that moment, holding a bottle of milk in a prisoner of war camp, looking at a German mother and her newborn daughter, he felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. One of the other women approached. She handed Harris a letter. It was written in careful English. Dear American soldiers, it read, we do not have words enough to thank you. You showed us what victory should mean. You showed us that even enemies can be human. You saved our children. You saved us. We will never forget. With gratitude, the mothers of Barrack 7. Harris folded the letter carefully. He did not trust himself to speak. He simply nodded and walked away. Outside, he stood in the rain and let the tears come. The war ended officially in May of 1945. The camps began to close. The women were processed, relocated, sent to displaced persons camps or back to what was left of their homes. Greta and Clara were among the last to leave. On the day of her departure, she asked to see Lieutenant Harris. He came to the gate. She stood on the other side holding Clara, who was now 3 months old. I want to say goodbye, Greta said. Harris nodded. Good luck, he said. Greta looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, You are a good man. You could have been cruel. You chose to be kind. Harris swallowed. I just did what was right. That is more than most. She reached through the wire and handed him a small bundle. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of Clara, smiling. On the back, in careful script, it read, To the man who gave her life. Thank you, Greta Müller. Harris looked at the photograph, then at Greta. Take care of her, he said. I will. And then she was gone. Harris stood at the gate for a long time, holding the photograph, watching the trucks disappear into the distance. Years passed. The world rebuilt itself. Germany rose from the ashes. America returned to peace. Lieutenant James Harris went home to Ohio, married, had children of his own. But he never forgot. He kept the photograph in his wallet. He kept the wooden cross on his dresser. And he told the story to his children and his grandchildren about the women in the camp and the babies who survived. Greta Müller rebuilt her life as well. She moved to a small town in southern Germany. She worked as a teacher. She raised Clara alone, teaching her daughter about kindness, about forgiveness, about the man who had saved their lives. When Clara grew up, she became a doctor. She dedicated her life to helping refugees, to caring for mothers and children in war zones, to carrying forward the lesson her mother had taught her. They were soldiers, Greta told her, but they chose to be human. In 1993, Clara traveled to the United States. She had spent years searching for the man who had helped her mother. She finally found him. James Harris was 76 years old, living in a small house in Ohio. When Clara knocked on his door, he opened it and stared at her, confused. "Can I help you?" he asked. "My name is Clara Müller," she said. "My mother was Greta Müller. You saved us." Harris's face went pale. He stepped back, his hand on the doorframe. "Greta," he whispered. Clara nodded. "She passed away last year, but she wanted me to find you, to thank you." Harris could not speak. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a photograph. It was the same one Greta had given him all those years ago. "She kept a copy," Clara said. "She told me the story every year on my birthday. She said you gave me a chance at life." Harris looked at the photograph, then at Clara. He saw Greta in her eyes. He saw the baby he had held in his arms. And he wept. Clara embraced him. They stood on the porch, two strangers bound by an act of kindness 50 years old, and cried together. Before she left, Clara asked to visit his grave when the time came. Harris laughed and said, "I'm not dead yet, but one day," Clara said. "Yes," Harris agreed, "one day." When James Harris died in 2004, Clara kept her promise. She flew to Ohio. She attended his funeral. She stood beside his grave as they lowered the casket into the earth. And when everyone had left, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small glass bottle. It was a baby bottle, old and worn, the kind used in field hospitals during the war. She placed it on his headstone. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing us that even in war, humanity survives." The sun broke through the clouds. The light fell across the grave, warm and golden, and for a moment, the world was still. Somewhere, in the distance, a baby cried, and life went on.